The Visit is a tragicomedy written in 1956 by Friedrich Dürrenmatt. He was a Marxist proponent of epic theatre and wrote the play as a satirical reflection of the corruption and carnage that took place in Europe around World War II. The play opens in the train station of a fictional decrepit town of Gulen, meaning liquid manure, where unemployed men are waiting with a banner for the return of Claire, a 63-year-old famed billionaire who grew up there. The mayor plans to squeeze some money out of her with a sentimental welcome operation, involving the charm of his future successor and Claire's past lover, Alfred Ill. The priest, doctor, and schoolmaster regurgitate distorted memories of Claire, who arrives unexpectedly soon with her entourage. A butler, a seventh husband, countless luggage-bound servants, and two criminal brutes who she paid $1 million to remove from death row and used to carry her around in a sedan chair from the Louvre. Claire goes on a flirty detour with Alfred, who longs for the past. Children sing for Claire, speeches are made, and she finally offers the town $1 billion, if they kill Alfred and buy her justice. Her butler reveals himself as the 45 years former Chief Justice of Gulen, who recounts the paternity suit that Claire had brought against Alfred whilst pregnant with his unwanted child. Two blind servants are brought forward to reveal that during this trial they had been bribed by Alfred to say that they had both slept with Claire, so she had tracked them down, blinded and castrated them. The child ended up dying and Claire becoming a prostitute, but Alfred insists this happened too long ago to bring up, no longer longing for the past. The mayor insists that this is Europe and therefore they are not savages, and the offer is rejected in the name of humanity. In Act 2, customers in Alfred's shop start to ask for costly items on credit. He becomes paranoid and realizes everyone's wearing new shoes. He is pacified by the policeman. Meanwhile, Claire is inviting reporters to her 8th wedding. Alfred tries to flee the town, but all citizens crowd around him at the station, and ironically wish him well on his travels while crowding him further until he's paralyzed from fear and collapses as the train leaves. By Act 3, the town has racked up a massive debt. Alfred's wife and children have had makeovers along with everyone else. Reporters flood the town and interview Alfred's family, who hold up a humanist veneer, helping the press paint a fairy tale picture. The drunken schoolmaster tries to tell them the truth about the billion in the name of Plato and humanitarianism, but Alfred accepts his fate because he made Claire what she is. Desertion of Claire for a small material gain is now mirrored in the townsfolk's unanimous rejection of him. There's a town meeting where they publicly announce their acceptance of Claire's donation. The speeches made at the end are rhetorically similar to the mayor's refusal of the offer in Act 1 and celebrate Western ideals, renouncing material gain, calling for justice, but the argument is completely reversed. The play satirizes the nature of capitalism masking in welfare agendas in sentiment. The lights are dimmed and Alfred is crushed by silent townsfolk, ironically dropping dead at the entrance of reporters, to whom it's announced that he died of joy from a sudden heart attack. Claire gives the mayor his cheque and leaves the town with his body in the casket she brought with her when she arrived. In research for my costume design, I looked at cartoonist Gerald Scarfe. I wanted to activate the parody and satire of the text in the visual comedy to present the characters as a product of their circumstances rather than autonomous evildoers. I'm looking specifically at Juvenalian satire, which abrasively ridicules social structures, as Gerald Scarfe does. I wanted to take from this style the grotesque caricature of modern life and bulbous bright shapes. To envision these overt gimmick costumes, I've also looked into the exclusive luxury of haute couture. The patterns of self-preservation and entrapment in oversaturated persona, captured in the play, are still prevalent in today's Western culture. I want to pick out specific visual nuances from today's extravaganza that will make the exaggerated world of the play tie in clearer with our current reality. The characters get increasingly unnatural and forced since the welcome operation begins, and through costume I want to show a drastic transformation of the people becoming glamorized, their tacky clothes becoming more curated and luxurious as opposed to practical, as a parallel to losing sincerity in commercialization. For the original costumes, I looked at the colour schemes in Roy Andersson's Living trilogy. He uses murky, muted tones hovering just above grey to express subtleties in his tragicomic humour. It was also useful to review his visual influences. In an interview, Andersson cites Hunters in the Snow by Peter Bruegel as a primary influence. This is clear in the shades and the shadows, but also in the fact that Bruegel was more interested in depicting peasants than the aristocrats, as is Andersson in his murky mundanity, which The Visit begins in. And here fits the costume of Alfred, the only one physically unchanged by the visit, and possibly only one to change mentally. I decided to make him look slightly innocent in the knitted woolen gilet, which references his initial likability and sweet charm. The homely look becomes comically ironic when he's calling Claire his little sorceress, and then being exposed for the things that he did. The mayor has the most poetic flair and is full of vague dramatism and sentiment which gets him everywhere in this story, so I decided muted lime and burgundy would suit him best, with worn corduroy trousers and checkered diamond suspenders that my granddad used to wear. As he says in the beginning, he's just in his shirt sleeves and didn't have time to put on his top hat, but he's sporting his best slip-on loafers. After the money makeovers, he starts to resemble Liberace, the nostalgic symbol of oversaturated capitalist persona. His burgundy has turned to purple, his lime is fresher, he's got an emerald gemstone on his belt, holographic ruffles, and silk flares. And the glamorous new toupee, symbolising his tendency to gloss over unpleasant patches. The Act 1 priest is humbly dressed with only wooden rosaries and extra crosses painted on so that he doesn't forget how holy he is. I wanted to give his robe a tight and comfortable Gestapo feel, but unlike this leather jacket, it is made of old, thick, grey tweed. In the transformation, I wanted the priest to resemble a Disney princess, whilst also looking like he could go on the runway, taking inspiration from the former Pope Prada and the 2018 Heavenly Bodies Met Gala. Since I'm trying to turn the priest into a gimmick, I picked and chose from different holy attires. This velvet texture is what I was going for on the slit of my priest's dress. Yves Saint Laurent logos replace where the cross should be, and tacky golden scales adorn the papal tiara. I put in the brick red shoes after Pope Benedict wore them so much there were articles written about why, and turns out it's a symbol of power in ancient Catholicism due to the hard to obtain red dye. Apparently more humble current Pope doesn't wear them. For the costumes of Alfred's teenage children, I had to look into London fashion and online retailers to see how utility turns into luxury when working class trends are adapted into high fashion. Here Carl is wearing a waterproof gilet, laceless sneakers for convenience, and heavy-duty work pants. In the transformation, he's gone overboard with the buckles and the pockets, which are a high fashion trend and a comedic reference point for the audience. The springs on his shoes are a reference to pain relief footwear, which avant-garde designers have concocted into a fashion trend. There are also tabby shoes and sock shoes to illustrate the forced layering of trends. Aside from the gold chains and flame mesh top, paperclip earrings, neon dip dye, Carl could also adopt the trend of barbed wire eyebrows. This would further satirise his borscht persona alongside the oversized ring bearing mimetic comedic significance. His sister Ottilie's original costume has the same drab veneer with a hint of childish vibrance. She's wearing an oversized jacket, which isn't necessarily a fashion statement but just pure circumstance, as well as the holes in her ill-fitting jeans, which have clearly been worn out and not only there for a design purpose. By the third act, the holes in her clothing are very much intentional. I've been experimenting with what looks the most overcrowded and pulled out of context, just like cultural appropriation in today's fashion, the use of which in the costumes aims to satirize the selection of traditional garments at random, based purely on aesthetic with no knowledge or regard for the context. I've mimicked a Galliano Dior collection where traditional Kenyan neck rings were worn with evening dresses, taken out of their context and meaning, and put somewhere where they don't belong. To satirize this, I have put the rings around the legs of the character, next to some Japanese letters and prints which are equally devoid of all meaning, to distort and exaggerate a problem to the point where it's laughable. I had this costume in mind as a Where's Wally of cultural appropriation. For the added absurdity, the skin-tight materials should be made out of scuba suits, and the padded materials should be made out of motorcycle gear. As shown here by Givenchy, another part of the costume is gelled down baby hairs, and the classic fashion turban. And the shoes came from some different research, mainly Gucci's spring collection, and inspiration from see-through fashion. And finally, here's the last costume for Claire. I envisioned Claire as a high-fashion robot chess piece and was greatly inspired by the restrictive movement and grandiose shapes of the triadic Bauhaus ballet. I particularly took interest in the work of Oskar Schlemmer, which inspired me to look at the costume as a sculpture. It made sense that he used to be a sculptor himself and therefore had the ability to conceive of all these shapes in costume when starting working with the triadic ballet. I decided to give Claire a mosaic of armour and the kind of shape which nobody could penetrate. The acting would have to work around that. This would make way for an alienated sort of movement and stylized composition around her. I've also drawn influence from a Georgian set and costume designer Petre Otschali, and along with his influence looked at some Soviet modernism architecture, which along with the Bauhaus ballet gave me the shape of Claire. That's probably all we have time for now, but thank you for listening, and sorry about submitting this late.